Hi there. Welcome to Dust. We are super happy to be with you. It's 6 p.m. right now in Paris. There is people joining 2021. The theme of the session will be tools. And we are super lucky today because we have Stan, Dust co-founder, you might have heard of, and Daphne from the engineering team. And they both will show you how tools work because we are super proud of this new feature and we hope that you will enjoy it as much as we'll enjoy it already. So feel free to ask any question you have, even the craziest one, and we are super happy to discuss with you right now. So I'm gonna hand over the mic to Stan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I think the agenda is pretty simple. We'll try to describe what we've been working on with tools and do a little bit deep dive on what it means for Dust in the weeks to come. Daphne will do a small live demo of creating an assistant in that new world of tools. We'll cover a little bit of pointers on our roadmap so that you guys have an idea of where we're going and what we're seeking building next. And finally, we'll finish with a Q&A. Okay, so the main thing we've been working on lately is the transition to what we call tools, which is obviously a name that you've heard of before about models. And the main idea is that today, Dust assistants are pretty simple by essence because they have only one action that is always run. It has some benefits. It makes them simple to understand, makes them very predictable, but it has a lot of constraints, which is the model is not capable of asking for precisions. The model is not capable of covering workflows that might have different things to do depending on the context. And more importantly, the assistants are not capable of covering more complex workflows that involve maybe multiple tools. So the action is the kind of basic units that we have built around assistants. And we'll start by covering the kind of actions that you already know and maybe repeat a little bit of stuff there and covering the actions and the tools that we'll be building next, and then explain you and demo you how it's going to work with multiple tools. Cool. So today, building an assistance, as you know, is a step that involves giving instructions, then adding an action to your assistant, which involves generally selecting data sources to retrieve information from your company data. And eventually after that, share with your team the assistance so that it can be used more broadly. Tools is kind of a departure from that very simple models. With tools, we'll have many tools that the assistant can use. So as usual, you'll always have the search data tool. So that's exactly the same tool or the same action. You specify the data sources that you want to give access to your assistants. As part of that process, because the model will now have, or the assistant will have to decide whether they want to use that tool or not, you will have to describe a little bit more what's the content of that information so that the model that powers the assistant has an idea of what's the content they can search from. And the assistants, after using that, will be able to build an answer. Another tool, which is an actions that existed before, is the latest data. That's one that is actually very simple but very powerful, so it's always a good reminder to cover it. The latest data doesn't run any semantic search query within the information that you provide it. You basically select a set of information and it'll try to fetch the most recent data from it and try to fill the context of the assistant or the model, the underlying model, with the data retrieved. It's extremely useful when, as an example, you want to retrieve recent information from Slack or recent information from emails if you push them to Dust. One way we're using it is an assistant that we call weekly incidents. We have a Slack channels where we talk about incidents when they happen. And at the end of the week, to prepare our weekly meeting, we just call Weekly Assistant. It uses the latest data tool. It retrieves all the information from that Slack channels and creates a table that is ready to be integrated in our weekly meeting notes. The query table tools, which we introduced a couple months ago, is really an attempt at giving analytical capabilities to our assistants. So it works on what we call tables. Tables can be uploaded manually in folders as CSV, but they're also discovered on your data source as CSV, Excel spreadsheets, and Notion databases. When you use that tool, the model will generate a SQL query to try to answer the user query, and will be able to give you quantitative response instead of response based on semantic search that really don't work well with tabular data. The extract data tool that we introduced something like a month ago is very interesting. It's basically, in a sense, similar to the most recent data tool, but has much more power. Basically, what it does is that it tries to process a very large amount of information coming from the data sources, always using the most recent information, so really specifying a window of a time frame. But then it extracts structured data from it along a schema that you define yourself as you define that tool. We'll show you an example in the live demo of how to use the extract data. And you'll see that the assistant builder also assists you in generating the schema for you so that it managed to extract the right information to follow the instructions you specified. As part of the move to tools, we're introducing a new tool, which is web navigation. So web navigation is a new capability that basically consists in being able to search the web and also browse content of pages. So when an assistant has access to that tool, you can ask it to search for information on the internet, but you can also ask it to pull information from a specific web page that you could copy in the prompt or in the instruction. Finally, the Dust Apps tools that already existed is really a way, you always want to think about it as a great way to extend the capabilities of the assistants. It has the capability of doing external API calls, so it's a great way to integrate with Zapier or Make or any kind of workflow platforms like this one, or even calling an API internally to process, to pull information from internal data in an API way, or even take action on your APIs. As an example, as part of the new tools release, with Dust Apps, you're capable of creating an assistant that can trigger a make workflow that will maybe send an email or create a calendar event. I think the Dust App is really a way to give you an exhaust valve for you to push the capability of assistance in any arbitrary ways, basically. Okay, so now why tools? The tools is really an ability to make your assistance richer. You can think of it in two different ways. First, there were assistants that you were creating for a specific tasks, and because the action that was associated with it was forced, you couldn't use it for multiple tasks. We'll have a demo later. If you ask code questions, sometimes you want to ask code questions about your own code base, and sometimes you want to ask code questions that might rely on general knowledge from the model. And with previous actions, it wasn't really possible to create one assistant to do both, because if you created an action that searched in your code, that assistant would always search there, where it's not necessarily what you want. The idea with tools is really to give more flexibility to the assistant. Now you can define a tool which consists in searching in your code, but at the same time, you can give instructions that when the question doesn't relate to your internal code base, the model should answer an answer based on its internal knowledge. It's obviously a way also to cover richer workflows, because now, as you can provide multiple tools, you can also prompt your assistants to follow a chain of tool calls to achieve a more complex workflow. I think it's still very early, but we presume that the most powerful assistants will be extremely scripted assistants with multiple tools, where you define a chain of tools that the assistant should follow in the instructions, such that when you call that assistant with specific tasks and for specific workflows, then the assistants go on and follow that kind of scripts based on the context of the conversation, and is now capable of achieving a much richer and much more complex workflow. Okay, so what does it mean for tools with an example here? So previously we had in many users people using multiple assistants as an example to create a follow-up for prospects in a sales context. And so basically with actions, since each assistant had only one specific actions, you would have to create multiple assistants, one to retrieve internal information about the prospects, another one to go on the internet to find information about the prospect that would be fresh and interesting to introduce, to inject in an email that you would make, and a third assistant that would kind of get the output of the two assistants and generate an email to send to your prospect. I think with tools, the idea is that now you'll be able to cover that entire workflow with one assistant. Basically, you'll give it access to a tool that is meant to search in your internal data. You give it the web navigation capability, which will allow it to search on the internet recent information about your prospects. And then finally, based on your instructions, it'll know that it's time to generate a draft of an email, and we'll be able to do that based on the result of the previous toll calls. So instead of having three assistants here, you really have just one assistant that you prompt by saying, whenever I call you with a prospect name, go search information internally first with that tool, and then go search on the web recent information with web navigation, and finally generate a template of email following that structure. So I think that's the gist of the idea of tools, and we're super excited to see what you're going to be building with that. So I'll give the mic to Daph, which will show you and give you an overview of how you can use tools and build assistance with that once we release it.
Hi everyone, my name is Daphne. I'm a software engineer at Dust, and I'm in charge of the demo. So I'm going on our Dust workspace. So I'm going to cover a very simple case, but let's build a new assistant. So I'm clicking on create a new assistant. I'm going to create the coder assistant that Stan mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to copy paste a very simple prompt. So basically what I'm telling the prompt is that is an assistant for programmers, that if we need code, we just want the code and nothing else. And yeah, basically that's it. So I can do that. And then if I'm going to the next screen, this is where you can see the most changes. So this is now called tools and data sources. And now I can add multiple tools. So I'm going to start by giving it access to our code base. So I'm going to select the GitHub connection and give it access to our Dust repository. So this is an important step. I have to correctly describe the data that is in this action, because now the assistant is going to decide whether it's going to be useful for it to use it or not. So I'm going to say this data contains all the code from our code base. Then I'm going to click on save. I will also give it access to our Slack engineering channel. So this is our Slack engineering channel. Sorry, where engineer discuss about the projects. And there's a typo here. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to give it access to another tool, which is the web navigation tool. So here you can see that the assistant have access to 3 tools. There's also a button here that's called Read Our Guide that will redirect you to a guide that we've written about with some example. So feel free to read it when you want to use it. So since I've give it access to multiple tools, I'm going to be a bit more specific in the instruction, and I'm going to add a sentence here saying that if the question is related to something specific to Dust, you should first look in the code base to see if you can find the information. You can also browse the web to find more information. And I'm also going to say, no, I think we're going to try with that. So next, my action are set, and I'm going to call it coder. And this handle is already taken, so I'm going to take one, CodeGenie, perfect, and save. All right, now I'm going to Genius. What was the, God, I don't remember the name.
CodeGenie.
CodeGenie. Okay, CodeGenie. I'm going to ask a question. Show me an example of the singleton pattern, which is a code pattern. So here you can see that as it's something generic, it just generated the answer and it didn't search on our data sources. Now, if I start with a new conversation and say, do we use Redis for what? So Redis is another library. Oh, I forgot to ping the assistants. CodeGenie. So now you can see that it's searching in the data. So it's generating the answer, explaining where we use it. And you can see that there's a new button here called Inspect the Tool Used. And we can see that he executed one step and he searched into our data to answer that. So now let's try something else. CodeGenie. I'm going to ask, what library do we use for payment? And what billing option do we offer? So I'm expecting it to search into the data too, which it does. And I can also inspect the results. And now I'm going to ask, does Stripe offer some billing options that we're not using? So now you can see that it is searching the web because obviously you can't find the information in the code. So it's browsing the page. And it seems it's browsing a lot of pages. Okay. So now he's explaining all the other options offered by Stripe, and I can also inspect the results. So I can see that he executed two steps. So first a web navigation, and then he requested some specific URLs to dig inside the content. So that's a very, very simple example of multi-tools and how the assistant is going to decide whether he can answer only with the model or search in the data source or search in the web. So now I'm going to quickly show you an example of an assistant that uses the extract action. So it's called Slack Engineering Highlights. So I'm just going to show you what it does first. So it's calling the extract data tool. This one is a bit long because it does a lot of things. And okay, so basically it's going to list all the engineering highlights with who is responsible for it, the light, the decision, and some stuff like that. And the interesting thing to look at is, so now I'm on the assistants. You can see the instruction, but we are mainly interested in looking at the action. So the extract data has been configured with our Slack engineering channel. And we have defined the schema of the data we want to extract. So this is something that can be generated from the instruction. So if you describe perfectly your instruction and the description and then let the model generate the instruction, you don't even have to fill all that. And basically, this is a great action, as Stan said earlier, to get some structured data from data that is obviously not structured in our Slack channel. So that's it for this one. And I wanted to show you one quickly, I don't know if I have time, but quickly one last assistant that we called God, just to show you like how crazy we are at Dust. So basically, this one has access to a lot of tools. So this is some of the things that we can do. So basically, it can interpret code. It can run a Dust tab that have access to our database to execute queries. It can send email. It has access to a memory. So if I tell God something, then it will remember it. It can create some GitHub issues. It can like basically do everything. That's why we called it code. And yeah, I think that's it for the short demo. I'm going to go back to the slides. And that is going to be complex. I need to find back the link, obviously. Sorry about that. Okay, here they are. And give back the mic to Stan.
Awesome, thanks. So basically, I was about to talk about roadmap, but with Code, you kind of see the roadmap. You can see, I think it's a great example that how the Dust apps can be used to extend your assistance in many different ways. We are kind of trying to push the boundary of what can be done through them. And eventually, as we find good use cases, we'll bring them back as products. So the ability to send email, the ability to create issues, the ability to connect to databases, all of that. Technically, you can create today with Dust apps, but we haven't productized yet. In terms of more broader roadmap and to serve as a conversation starter for the questions, the idea here is to give you an overview of where we're going. So I think the things we have top of mind for the months to come, and we're not talking multi-years roadmap here, we're talking months roadmap, is, as I just mentioned, external actions is really the ability to maybe prepare actions and make these actions take place in the world from the assistant. Sending an email is an obvious one. Modifying a Notion page would be another one. Eventually, you would be able to create your own action by specifying API calls to maybe reimburse users on your platform, or maybe delete something or add something in a database. The idea here is that those external actions will really be prepared and proposed by the model, and we would keep the human in the loop to confirm the action should be taken as the model proposes it. In the close future, we'll probably take another pass at connections. We've made a sprint, or we added a lot of connections maybe a couple months ago. We think it's time to explore new connections. The top of mind connections that we have today are probably the Microsoft ecosystem and Zendesk, and probably as a slightly lower priority, but still very interesting, Jira in the Confluence and in the Atlassian ecosystem. We've had a lot of ask from larger companies for EU infra. That's something that we also going to be working on. If you have feedback on that and kind of needs, we all hears for them. One thing that will be a fast follow of tools is obviously code interpretation. Here we're going to be taking a take that is quite interesting. So code interpretation, as it works in ChatGPT, is consists in the model generating Python code that is run server-side to then generate maybe a file or maybe generate a response or an answer that will be shown to the model to answer the questions of the user. And I think we want to push it a notch further, and we'll be taking the stance of doing client-side interpretation here. So that means that we'll be able to run the code client-side, which will enable the assistant to maybe compute something and return it to the conversation, maybe transform a file and return it to the conversation for download, but more interestingly, execute code in a safe environment on the client of the user. And so what it will allow us to do is, as an example, give it a CSV file and ask it to generate an interactive graph of what's going on in that file. And the graph will not be an image that has been generated server-side and brought client-side. It's going to be actual code running inside your browser that you will be able to interact with in a safe way. After that, or I mean, in the same realm of things that are really top of mind for us are obviously groups. So what we put behind the name groups is really the ability to segment the data that Dust has access to and assign people to get access to that data. So that basically solves the problem of companies that maybe have a policy that consists in not sharing the engineering data with the rest of the company and maybe not sharing the financial team data with the rest of the company. So here the idea is to be able to create a group for engineering, assign engineers to it so that they can create assistants on top of that data, and similar for the finance team. And obviously there's going to be a lot of interesting questions there, because once you create an assistant on top of the engineering data, do you want to restrict it to the engineers only? There are probably cases where you want to share it anyway with the rest of the team. And so really exploring the product space there. Again, if you have ideas, feedback, or things that you've felt were missing around that concept, we're really all ears. And finally, the big subject that will come next as well is ubiquity. And by ubiquity, we really mean bringing Dust exactly where you walk as a user. So the typical use case that are already being built by some of our users is, I'm a sales, I use Salesforce, I want Dust in Salesforce. So maybe some of our users, I've built Salesforce plugin that connects to Dust and provide answers directly in Salesforce. I'm doing support, I live in Intercom, I really need data coming from the rest of the company, that's why Dust is so useful to me, but I want to interact with Dust through Intercom. And there is going to be twofold, probably exploring the emergence of a browser extension that will bring you Dust in situ without you having to switch tabs, but also pushing the integration with those platforms. As an example, Salesforce, as I meant, is probably a plugin where Dust appears and that is easy to install. In Intercom, you generally walk through comments and on the tickets, and so maybe be able to ping Dust in the comments would be something very useful. So that's pretty much it for the roadmap. I think I hope it serves as a good conversation starter and conversation for your questions. I hope you really enjoyed what you've seen, and I'll leave it to Pauline to mediate the questions.
Thank you so much, Stan. So we had several questions already that I did my best to answer directly in the chat, but guys, please feel free to share your additional questions, or maybe if you want to ask stuff about Dust Vision or questions about LLMs, I know Stan will be super happy to answer your questions. Does anyone want to focus on one specific question? We had a question about Salesforce, building connectors, for example. We had a question about Vision, Stan, as well.
Yeah. So Vision, yeah, I didn't mention it because it's so obvious. It is a must-have because while it's not an objective, it's a necessary condition for us to be on par with ChatGPT. And so if ChatGPT has Vision, we will have Vision. There is a tension there, of course. There's two tensions that are interesting. Is that first, how useful is Vision for productivity in the enterprise? We do believe it's useful, and that's why we're going to build it. The second tension is that Vision is not available on every models. And so there's going to be an interesting product questions on how we make it available depending on your assistant being built on GPT-4 or Turbo, or maybe Gemini Pro, which has Vision, but as an example, the Claude suite doesn't. In terms of Salesforce is a tricky one. Salesforce is tricky because there is no Salesforce that looks like another Salesforce. That being said, basically what we believe we can do and why we prioritize Microsoft and Zendesk is because given how diverse these Salesforce implementations are, we've seen success in users building the logic on their end to push the Salesforce data to us. Obviously, that's not the ideal solution, but that's something where we are extremely willing ourselves to really help you based on the others users that we've seen do it, help you build yourself a way to push your Salesforce data to Dust. And as we explore with a couple users what it means to do it, we'll probably find a way to build the connectors that works decently despite the diversity of Salesforce implementation.
Thank you. Then we have a question from Adam, who is, hey Adam, happy to see you there. He heard about development about private data sources and private assistants. Can you do an update on this?
Yes, sure. So that's really in the context of groups. As we work on introducing that concept of basically access control list within Dust, and that's access control list of the data to people and the access control list of people to assistants. Naturally, we'll be able, out of that kind of basis, to make a personal data source emerge. And so as soon as we'll have personal data source, the first thing is to give access to websites and folders to every users and not the builders. As we do that, the role of the builders will kind of decrease and users will be more empowered to also create or add data to Dust. And then it also enables us, and we see the kind of sparkle of that through our labs. So it's not available to everybody, but something we've been working on that allows you to process transcripts coming from Gong or Google Drive. It really will enable us to create connections to certain platforms where the data is by nature private. And the first thing top of mind, obviously, is email. So as soon as we get groups going, we'll get personal data source. As soon as we get personal data source, we'll get email. And that's, we think it's something that's quite exciting.
Another two questions on the same topic, meaning Dust sending, drafting, and sending stuff. So Constantine asked for email. When Dust will be able to draft and send emails, and a very close one. So I'm doing a joint there. Enguerrand wants to know when Dust will be able to write in a G sheet, for example.
Yep. So those two ones are really related. This is what we put under the umbrella of external actions. I think our take here is really to create. So basically, external actions is not an action that.
Sorry, my bad.
So external action is not something that the model will do without you asking your permission. It's really a way to push the model to create data along a template so that the action is ready to go. So email is a good example. And sending an email is what? It's you giving us the permission to send an email. And then it's us giving you the ability to add the prepare email external action or whatnot to your assistant, so that when you ask it to prepare your email, it doesn't give you a blob of text. It gives you a kind of a nicely formatted form with the email address pre-filled, the subject pre-filled, the email pre-filled. You can probably maybe edit it there, or maybe ask the assistant to tweak it a little bit to make you another proposal. And then sending the email will really be just a button click, because we do have the connection and the authorization from you to send the email. Writing to JSheets and writing to Notion is a same version of that. Obviously, it's also more complicated, because it's very complicated to show within the Dust interface that you're going to be writing in that spot or whatnot. But I think it's something that's perfectly doable. So that's really, as an example, writing to Notion or Google Docs, that would really be, oh, I've changed this, and you see the red lines, or you see the paragraph that has been added, and you just commit the change. And we think that's something that is really that can be really powerful. And then writing to Google Sheets is a good one. To be honest, I haven't thought about this one too much. If you have kind of examples of use case, I'd be really interested in getting them, and we can come back to the question.
Anything you want to share now, Enguerrand, about the writing in the Google Sheet? Don't think so.
I can, so Nevena asks, does it mean that private Slack channels will be able to get connected to Dust? That's a really good one. Basically, the problem with private channels today is that, so we don't list the private channels in the interface, because we believe it's a leak of information, even for the builders or the admin that could be willing to tweak the access of Dust, because if we have a private channels, fire the CISO. When the CISO sees the list, we kind of leaking very sensitive information. But at the same time, the CISO is supposed to see everything. So I think it's a question of, as we move to groups, we'll be able to formalize a little bit more the role of the admin and be much clearer about what it means to be a Dust admin, which will be much clearer to the CISO role. And as we do that, that's definitely something that will make more sense, because then you could say, okay, I have that private channels. This is the engineering team B that uses it. It's very sensitive because it's a very secret project. And so the CISO will be able to then say, okay, I create a group for that very sensitive team and I add the private channels there. And in that world where we have a richer way to express permission, I think that's something that's definitely in the realm of the possible indeed.
Thank you so much. And Enguerrand gave us more details. Like, it's a human resource talent use case. It'd like to extract data from CVs and write those in Google Sheets.
Yeah, so that use case seems extremely meaningful. So basically, adding a row to a Google Sheet seems something that we can totally do. Obviously, adding a column is probably a more complex thing, because when you add a column, you kind of expect that there is kind of something that needs to be computed for each column, and so that's a much harder kind of product questions. But definitely adding a line, let's say you have a CV or a curriculum or a resume, and you put it in conversation and you use your assistant that is resume to JSheets, and it kind of, you just run it, it'll read the resume, it'll extract the data in the pattern you want, and probably prepare a line addition in Google Sheets. That seems exactly the kind of things we have in mind for those external actions.
And there is one last question from Adam, who wants to know if adding Google Sites as a connection would be something doable.
So basically, today, when we ask permissions, we do constrain them to Google Drive. And so Google Sites really kind of is a different API, so different connectors. So to be very transparent, that would have to be prioritized against our other connectors. And that's, to be honest, again, and perfectly transparent, that's something we've been hearing a lot. I think it would be very interesting to hear your use case. And as always, I think it's important to, something that we didn't mention that is probably interesting for those kind of connection use case that are not so common and that will take us time to get to. We're working on adding Dust as an officially supported action in Make and Zapier and Windmill and Pipedream. The idea is that you would have two basic actions, which is probably push something to a given folder, and the other action would be to trigger a conversation with an assistant. And so if you can connect one of those workflow platforms in a way that it can grab the right information from you and keep it up to date by pushing it to all the data sources, I think building those kind of integration, especially if the data is not too live, will be extremely easy.
Thank you, Stan. And we have another question from Guillaume. We find it tricky sometimes to manage the Google Drive connection because at his company, actually, the Google Drive is owned by the COO, and he is the builder, and he doesn't have admin rights. So what can you recommend in this situation?
Yeah, this is exactly right in the middle of the product questions we have around groups. Obviously, so the ideal world we would love is everybody has access to everything, and the CEO or the CISO or whoever is holding the keys just give access to all of the Google Drive to Dust, and everybody can read it, and every assistant can read it, and everybody can use it, and then we don't have any problems. The problem is that ideal world exists in some places, mostly young startups, but doesn't exist in general. And so there is nothing, there's not a lot that we can do to circumvent those constraints, and especially the fact that one person or a very small group of persons is supposed to manage the access rights. Because one thing that we can think of is say, well, whatever, we'll let everybody connect through Google Drive with their OAuth, and they'll be able to select drives and create data sources that they can share to other people, and we don't need the CISO anymore, and the life is nice. The problem with that is that the next thing that the CISO or the CEO or whoever it is who is managing the rights will do is to deactivate the OAuth connection of everybody but him to Dust. And so we then at the end back in the same place where we have only one person that can connect and everybody is kind of tied to it. So we hope that groups will, and this kind of access control management into Dust will make the person that holds the keys life much easier and make the decision to share that data for them much easier, because they will be able to restrict the group of people they share the data with. And they will also be able to observe and check who has access to what very easily. Obviously, it is a kind of big product to do on the kind of management of who has access to what, but that's something we believe we have to do for that reason. And so my best answer there is really by making your CEO's life much easier, they'll be much more willing to share data rapidly and easily.
Thank you so much. And there is one last question from Tilo or Tilo. I don't know how to pronounce it well, so my apologize. But do we already have access to tools like create tables, extended capability through Zapier, or is it still under alpha?
So right now, you do have access to create tables, you do have access to extract data, you do have access to Dust apps that you can use to extend by calling into APIs such as Zapier.
And in the documentation that we wrote and that is available in the product, we shared a step-by-step example of how to use a Zapier and a Make extension. I think one is for creating Google Calendar invites, and the other one, I think, is for sending emails. So even if you're not an engineer, you can just follow the steps and easily build those actions until we properly put them in the product.
But so technically, you already have access to them. You don't have access to web navigation yet, because it really makes a lot of sense only in the tools and the ability for assistants to use multiple tools. But you can totally use create tables today with the kind of current assistants. The only thing is that that assistant will always run that action at all time.
Any additional questions, guys? Are you good for today? Well, I think I think you are done with your questions. So I think the last bit is to thank you. It was the first time we did that, so we hope that you enjoyed it and it was valuable to you. Is there any date for the tool release?
I think Daphne can answer that question.
So I can answer that question because just before the meeting, there was a post on Slack saying we are shipping tomorrow 4 p.m. And the last thing to ship is on my hand. So tomorrow 4 p.m.
So now you know.
Maybe Monday 8 a.m., but we'll see.
No, I can do it. I can definitely do it. So tomorrow afternoon, be ready to test tools.
Over the weekend.
But thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Please feel free to reach out to us to share feedback about today, what you liked, what you didn't like, what we could do better, because sharing is caring all the time. And we hope to get a lot of feedback from you guys as well about the tools, and that you will enjoy it as much as we enjoy it as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.